Chapter 12, Section 2 is centered on the Mongols and the Mongol conquest and sort of where they come from and how they came into power. So we'll start with talking about the Asian steppes. Now, if you had me for earlier parts of the year, we learned about the steppes regions, which gave rise to a group of people called the Indo-Europeans. And it also talks about how they generally migrated to different parts of the globe, especially into modern-day Turkey, which was at that time known as Anatolia or Asia Minor, where a powerful group called the Hittites sort of arose. Today, we're going to take a look at the Eastern steppes. Those were from the Western steppes, kind of modern-day Ukraine, southern Russia. Today, we're going to take a look at the Eastern steppes, which are located in present-day Mongolia, and they were the ancient home to the Huns, the Turks, and even the Mongols. Now, one of the reasons why these nomadic groups, the Turks, the Huns, the Mongols, and all the other ones left this region is due to very drastic seasonal temperature changes. From what I understand, it can go from like in the negatives all the way up to like 97 degrees Fahrenheit in different seasons. So this would cause them to migrate to the south and to the west, where things are a little bit more normal geographically and climate factors are a little bit more standard. I'm going to show you the map here real quick. These are the Western steppes. So this is kind of modern day Ukraine right here. This is a little bit of southern Russia. Okay. These are the Eastern steppes. This is kind of modern day Mongolia up in this region. Here's kind of where China is today. So this is the region where the Mongols were from, and that's what we're focusing on today. All right. The nomadic way of life is something important to understand. A lot of times they refer to these nomads of this time as pastoralists. These are nomadic peoples that generally would herd domesticated animals like goats, sheep, things of that nature, cattle. But they are always really dependent on the horse. These groups are usually tied to their horse, and the horse would give the Mongols a lot of success. They depended on their animals for things like food, clothing, and housing, of course. The Asian nomads, like I said, really relied heavily on the horse. They lived in portable tents that were made from animal hides and felts. They were called yurts. Clans is how they were organized. These are kinship groups that claim to be descended from a common ancestor. Now, next, what we'll take a look at is how these steppe nomads sort of terrorized settled societies, even though the two groups did trade with each other. The two groups often traded, but in general, the settled societies lived in great fear of attacks from these vicious nomads. The nomads would sometimes grow jealous of the wealth and land and power and prestige that the settled peoples had. And so they would attack them and kill them off and take what they could. The thing about it is that when the government systems of the state or empire that was controlling the land was strong, they were able to fight off these nomadic peoples. However, as we know, there are, undulations, a roller coaster ride of power. And so during the weak points, the nomads would be able to conquer and sometimes take over these entire empires, kingdoms, etc. This is sort of how the Mongols practiced things and how they came into power. One of their greatest leaders was Genghis Khan. Around 1200, he was a military leader. He was actually named Temujin. He began to fight, defeat, and recruit his rivals, the rival nomadic groups, into a unified force. Genghis Khan actually means universal ruler or king of all. By 1225, Central Asia had been taken from the Muslims by these Mongols. And then the Mongols under Genghis were actually really ruthless and savage. They killed, they raped, and enslaved many of their victims. There's a History Channel show called Mankind, the Story of All of Us. And it has an excerpt there about the Mongols and Genghis Khan. And it basically states a statistic that you could look up that states that 1/5 of all people of Asian descent are somehow related to Genghis Khan through DNA. And that's under the precedent that he, during his lifetime, had raped so many women that this is the result. It's awful. I think there's a lot of my students in the past who've really, Genghis Khan, Genghis Khan, he's awesome. He's a key baller. But in my opinion, knowing that stat, no, Genghis Khan, he was a great conqueror. He did a lot of things there. He had a good organization. He's a good military guy. But as far as being a good person, I don't think anybody who could do that could ever be classified in that category. I know it's different times. I know there were different things, but I think that people have to understand that there's right and wrong. And we're talking about the 1200s here. I mean, people generally knew what was right and what was wrong, no matter where you're from. So that's just my personal opinion on that. Capital B is going to talk about conquest. One reason for the success of the Mongols was organization. Genghis Khan was a great organizer. Strategy and military tactics were also important factors. One of the big advantages that the Mongols had in battle was cavalry, or soldiers on horseback. This is something that they grow accustomed to from a very young age. Cruelty, though, as I mentioned earlier, became the biggest factor. The fear factor was really a major cause for Mongol success. Some groups just submitted entirely. Genghis Khan would actually bolster that if the groups just gave up, that some people would get killed and people would be hurt, but not everyone. If you tried to resist the Mongol invasion, then he may actually kill every single person in the entire city once they had conquered it. Now, for more information regarding the Mongol success, there's a great page on 332, which talks about some of the ins and outs of the things that they did and prepared militarily for. Roman numeral number 3 talks about the Mongol Empire. So we'll take a look at just a few of the areas that they had conquered and how they ruled. It was the largest empire in history. Genghis Khan died in 1227, but his successors, his children and his grandchildren, continued to conquer land all the way from, eastern portion of China to Poland. They created the largest unified land empire in history. You can see the detail of that on the map on page 334. I'll show you that here momentarily. One of the things that's interesting is called the Khanates. As the Mongol land began to grow, what they did is they divided the land into 4 regions called Khanates. These are the Khanates. The Khanate of the Great Khan was Mongolia and China. The Khanate of Chagatai was Central Asia. The Ilkhanate was Persia. And the Khanate of the Golden Horde, which you have learned about in the past if you have me in class, was Russia. Let's take a look at that. There's an important map here that we'll go over here together. I do apologize. I hope this doesn't make you dizzy. Let's zoom out a tad bit here. This is the page I was talking about that shows you how the Mongols were so powerful. And then this is a further detail. That's a yurt right there, an example of those Mongolian tents. And then this is the map of the actual empire and where the Khanates existed. This is the Khanate of the Great Khan, basically the central point of China now. This is the Khanate of the Golden Horde, which was the western steppes and basically modern day portions of southern Russia. This is the Ilkhanate. They referred to this as Persia, but it's basically the Middle East, region of the Middle East, Iraq, Iran. That's where those regions are today. This is Chagatai. This was a region taken away from the Muslims in battle. Okay, so the Mongols reconquer this region from the Muslims. So those are your 4 basic Khanates or regions, and each Khanate was actually ruled, as I'll state here, by one of the descendants of Genghis Khan. To close off the lesson, we'll talk about the Pax Mongolica. This was something that we learned about in the past. The Pax Romana was the Roman peace. It's a 207-year period of Roman peace where they had some battles, but really no major wars. Well, the Pax Mongolica was the Mongol peace, and it lasted for about 100 years from roughly 1250 to 1350. There's some leeway there both ways. I wouldn't consider those strict bookend dates, but this is a time period throughout the Mongol Empire when law and stability were present in any controlled lands. What that allowed for was safe passage for traders, caravans, missionaries, even religious pilgrims. The Mongols were very accepting of different religious practices. They really didn't enforce any kind of strict religion. And in fact, they adopted some of the religions that they conquered as well. Trade would increase between Europe and Asia and throughout the other regions as well. One of the things that happens with that is cultural diffusion, that term that we've learned about in almost every section. But as cultural diffusion and trade take place during this time period, 1200s, 1300s, so did the spread of the bubonic plague, which was devastating to Muslim-controlled areas and also Europe and Asia. Thank you.